The air in Byzantium was thick with fear. The scent of death lingered in every corner of the empire. A boy, no older than 10, sat on a throne of gold and terror, with the weight of an empire on his frail shoulders. His hands, so small they could hardly hold a dagger, commanded the execution of hundreds, maybe thousands. His orders were absolute, his power undeniable. The cries of the condemned echoed through the marble halls, but their pleas fell on deaf ears. This is the story of a child who shaped history with blood and cruelty. The rise of an emperor whose reign was as short as it was brutal. A child's innocence twisted into a ruler's monstrous will. But how did such a young mind come to wield power so unrelenting? And what became of the empire that answered his cruel call? Prepare to enter a world where power is born from tragedy, where a child's heart could be darker than the shadows of the palace. Like and subscribe to uncover this chilling tale of a Byzantine boy emperor who ruled with a terror beyond his years. The story begins with a figure who defies all logic and reason, a 10-year-old boy thrust into the seat of one of history's greatest empires. His empire was built on conquest, culture, and power, but the forces that led him to rule were beyond even the harshest imaginations. In the first chapter, we follow the events that shaped this boy's ascent. A boy who would one day sign orders for blood to be spilled in the name of control. We step into the grand, labyrinthine halls of the palace, feeling the weight of both marble and cruelty that define this era. The emperor's youth was both a symbol of hope and a harbinger of doom. His reign was marked by tragedy, but was it simply a reflection of the political chaos around him? Or was there something darker, something deeply human that shaped his choices? In the final chapter, we delve deeper into the broader consequences of his rule. We look beyond the boy and focus on how his decisions sent ripples through the empire. The myths surrounding his reign, the suffering of the common people, and the echo of his cruelty would live on long after his reign. The empire he inherited would never be the same, nor would history ever forget the price of absolute power in the hands of a child. The palace walls, once a symbol of majesty and unshakable power, now stood as a silent witness to the horror unfolding within. High above the city of Constantinople, the marble columns seemed to tremble with the weight of the empire's impending doom. Within these gilded halls, where music once flowed and scholars debated, there now echoed only the whispers of dread. A boy, still in the tender grip of childhood, was crowned as the ruler of the Byzantine Empire. His name was Alexios, a child destined to carve his mark on history, but not with the brush of wisdom or diplomacy. His mark would be one of blood. The story of how a boy so young could command such fear is not one that follows the usual path of history. In most empires, a child would have been nothing more than a puppet, manipulated by advisors, the throne a mere illusion of power. But Alexios, orphaned by the murder of his father, found himself crowned emperor in an empire already on the brink of collapse. The court was a jungle, where every whisper could lead to betrayal, and every glance could spell death. The power vacuum left by his father's assassination bred chaos. And it was in this chaos that Alexios learns that to survive, one had to be ruthless. It was not long before the boy found himself surrounded by men and women who saw his reign as an opportunity to claw their way into power. The palace became a battleground where courtiers plotted, assassins waited, and every decision made by the boy king seemed to send the empire into further turmoil. His advisors, blinded by their ambition, failed to see the deep well of rage that brewed inside the child. His youth should have been a shield, but instead it became a weapon, one honed by the fear that permeated every corner of the empire. As the boy sat upon his throne, small and fragile in his royal garb, it was easy to forget that behind those wide, innocent eyes, there burned an ambition forged in tragedy. Alexios had witnessed horrors no child should have ever seen. The murder of his father, the betrayal of his family, these were not merely events. They were the seeds of something far darker. And in the stillness of the imperial court, the boy began to realize that power, the kind that demanded respect, required cruelty. He could feel it in the air, like a thick fog, the cold truth that mercy was a luxury the empire could not afford. The first bloodshed came swiftly. It began with those closest to the throne, his own family, his uncles, his cousins. The boy ordered their deaths not in any public display of execution, but in the quiet, chilling certainty that their lives were as disposable as the worn parchment on which his royal decrees were written. It was said that Alexios issued his orders not with the trembling hands of a child, but with the cold, practiced precision of a ruler twice his age. His voice, soft and high, carried through the halls, commanding the executioners with the same ease as if he were directing a play. His family, long seen as a threat to his rule, were put to death in the darkest hours of night, their bodies disposed of quickly, their names erased from history. The executions, carried out under the cover of darkness, sent a chilling message throughout the empire. There was no room for weakness, not even in the bloodline. The boy emperor's rule had begun, and it began with silence, with coldness, with the bodies of those who dared to stand in his way. Whispers of his cruelties spread throughout the city like wildfire. The people, once hopeful for a young ruler who might restore the empire's former glory, found themselves trembling in fear. What had happened to the child they thought would bring a fresh dawn to Byzantium? Had the tragedy of his life, the blood of his family on his hands, turned him into something monstrous? Was this the boy who would one day lead an empire to greatness, or was he the herald of its final tragic fall? The boy's reign was not just one of personal suffering. It was a reflection of the empire itself, fractured, torn apart by ambition, blood, and the violent tides of history. Alexios ruled from a throne built on the ruins of the past, each decision a desperate attempt to grasp at something greater than himself. But with every death, every betrayal, every violent act, the empire drifted further from salvation and closer to destruction. Yet in his mind, there was no other way. The empire, with its fractured alliances, its competing factions, could not afford weakness. He had learned that the hard way. His father's murder, the betrayal of those who had once sworn loyalty, all of it had led to this moment. A boy on a throne, alone with his fear, his anger, and his thirst for control. Power was the only answer, and power for Alexios meant violence. The boy who was once a symbol of hope had become a symbol of terror. But what did this mean for the empire that he ruled? For the people whose lives were bound to his whims? Could a child, so young and so consumed by the need for control, truly understand the weight of the empire he governed? And what of the future? Could such a reign endure, or was it doomed from the very beginning? As the days turned into months, the presence of the young emperor grew ever more oppressive. Beneath the grand domes of the imperial palace, a suffocating tension brewed. The streets of Constantinople, once alive with the bustle of merchants, scholars, and nobles, had fallen silent, as if the very heartbeat of the empire had stilled in the shadow of Alexios's reign. In the imperial court, nobles who once spoke with pride of their positions now whispered behind closed doors, fearful of drawing attention to themselves. The young emperor's gaze, despite its innocence, had a weight to it, a weight that carried the promise of swift and brutal retribution for those who failed to comply with his will. But Alexios was not only a figurehead of terror, he was also a symbol of the empire's lost potential. The Byzantine Empire had once been a beacon of learning, culture, and military might. Its legacy stretched from the days of the Roman Empire itself. Yet now, under the rule of a child who was more likely to issue a death sentence than a decree of peace, the empire was spiraling into chaos. The boy's cruelty was not just personal, it was systemic, infecting every aspect of the empire's structure. The boy emperor's orders grew more frequent, more erratic. Those who had once been trusted advisors began to fall one by one. Ministers, generals, even the most revered philosophers were dragged from their homes in the dead of night, their lives extinguished as easily as a candle's flame. And yet amidst this bloodshed, the empire seemed to hang on, as if driven by something beyond its emperor's will. Was it the inertia of history itself, a force that could not be easily stopped? Or was it simply that the horrors inflicted upon the empire were so profound that they numbed the people into compliance? The executions, now regular and commonplace, became a grisly spectacle. Though the public had little choice but to endure, they could not ignore the strange, almost hypnotic rhythm of it all. The sound of the executioner's axe striking the neck of the condemned echoed through the narrow streets like the tolling of a bell, signaling the death of both the individual and the hope that the empire might ever return to its former glory. And yet, the boy emperor seemed unbothered, even distant from the carnage he orchestrated. His days were spent in his chambers, poring over ancient texts and military strategies, his young mind ever fixated on maintaining control. As his reign wore on, the weight of power began to take its toll on Alexios in ways unseen by those around him. His face, once youthful and full of life, began to show the strain of his decisions. The eyes that once gleamed with curiosity now seemed hollow, distant, as if the boy who had once dreamed of greatness was slowly being consumed by it. But there was no turning back. In Alexios' mind, every act of violence was a necessary one. His rule could not survive without fear. It was the only language the empire understood. His thoughts were consumed by one singular idea, the preservation of his power. Nothing else mattered. The people, the empire, the ideals of Byzantium, they were all secondary to the relentless pursuit of dominance. The boy emperor's court became a grotesque reflection of his mind, a place where the line between ruler and tyrant was blurred beyond recognition. The once grand imperial halls, adorned with gold and marble, now seemed to echo with the whispers of ghosts, the spirits of those who had been erased from history by the boy's hand. The palace that had once stood as a symbol of civilization had become a prison for all who dwelt within it, trapped in the suffocating embrace of a ruler who saw them as little more than pawns in his game. And yet, for all the bloodshed, for all the terror that Alexios had unleashed upon the empire, there remained a tragic truth. He was, in many ways, still a child. Beneath the layers of cruelty and coldness, there was a fragility that could not be hidden. He had inherited an empire already on the brink of collapse, and his youth, once a promise of change, had become a cruel twist of fate. The tragedy of Alexios' reign was not just the lives lost, nor the suffering of the people. It was that the boy, in his desperation to hold on to power, had never known anything other than violence and fear. He had never known peace. As the years passed, the boy emperor's reign became a dark legend. His actions, his cruelty, became the stuff of myth and rumor. Was he a product of his time? A child shaped by the brutal forces that surrounded him? Or had he been doomed from the start? A boy whose very existence was destined to bring tragedy to the empire he ruled. Historians would debate this question for centuries to come, but one truth remained. The reign of Alexios would forever be marked by the blood of the innocent, the destruction of the old order, and the tragic figure of a child who had become both the emperor and the executioner. As the empire crumbled under the weight of a child's cruelty, one question lingered in the air. How could the fate of an entire civilization rest in the hands of a boy who never truly understood the cost of his actions? Alexios' reign, marked by violence and betrayal, serves as a tragic reminder of the fragility of power. His name may have been lost to time, but the echoes of his rule, the suffering, the bloodshed, the cruelty, remain forever etched into the history of the Byzantine Empire. In the end, Alexios' story is not just one of empire and power. It is the story of a child's innocence twisted by the very forces that were meant to protect him. It is a tale of how the hunger for control can consume even the purest heart, how the price of ambition is often paid in blood. And perhaps in the quiet reflection of history, we realize that even the most brutal of rulers were once, somewhere deep inside, just children, lost in the endless struggle for power, surrounded by a world that would never forgive their sins. This was the tragedy of Alexios, the boy emperor who ordered mass executions at the tender age of 10, a ruler born of blood, whose empire would never be the same again. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you want to uncover more forgotten stories of history's darkest rulers.